Welcome to the advanced tutorial on the Nascar Thunder 2004 Mod Master Toolset. We're going to cover in depth how to create your own packs from scratch. So I'm only going to cover the things that weren't covered in the user tutorial. So some of these settings up top, I'm not going to bother with any of this. First thing we need to do is go through the file structures. So there's a couple folders here. The packs you don't need to touch. That's going to get automatically generated by the program. The stats and the paints are the two locations you're going to need to mess with. In the stats folder, you're going to have subfolders that are series. These can be real, these can be made up, it doesn't matter. But in the real one, you're going to have two files for each year. One is going to be the races, one is going to be the stats, and they have to be named whatever you call your year, which doesn't have to be a number, it doesn't have to be a real year, it can be something like 2000, whatever. It doesn't even have to be a year, it can be Talladega Nights races, and you can put Talladega Nights results or made up or real into this file, it doesn't matter. So we're going to go through that one, we're going to go through one existing one here. So 2003 races will look like this. Now this file has to be very specifically set up. This first field here, don't worry about that. That 0, they're just leftover remnants. This needs to be a CSV, which is a comma separated value. You can use Excel for this. You could use other various programs for this. You don't have to have Excel to do this, but it is often used for stuff like this. I'm going to use it because I have it. But you could use anything else. As long as you save as a CSV with underscore races, whatever your year or your group is, underscore races. Now, the track name has to be here above. Let me just encapsulate this. This is one entry. This is one race. This many columns. And then this is one race. That same amount of columns. You're going to have a column for the starting position of the driver. You're going to have a column where their name is, first name, last name, and this has to match the formatting within all the results and their season standings for it to match up. It also has to match your folder names for your paints, which we'll get to later. Don't worry about decimal points. If you have somebody like J.J. Yaley and his name is J.J. Yaley, you can leave out the dots in the folder names and everything else. You can have them in here if you want. It doesn't matter. It'll match up without them. It just removes them. The program does behind the scenes to match things up and check folders and files and whatnot. But full name, first name, last name. Someone like John Hunter Nemechek, because his first name field would be John Hunter or his last name field would be Hunter Nemechek, which are both too long. You'd probably have to change his in all of the results to be like J.H. Nemechek or whatever you decide to name him in your stats and what you want him to be named in the game. Then you got a lap sled column. This column here, this R stat, it was an old ranking. It's an old remnant. You don't need any data here. I just kind of left it in case we find some other piece of data that we want to include in stats, then I can use it for that. But right now, this is not used. It was just a remnant. So this could be blank. It doesn't matter. It's not going to get used at all. Status, I don't have it for these results. But when you get your results on Racing Reference and whatnot, you're going to have stuff. It's going to say running for drivers. And then the people down in the back, it's going to say stuff like engine, crashed, etc., etc. The only thing this is used for, I have a stat that is separated for crashed versus a regular DNF. So basically, if it doesn't say running, it's a DNF. But if it says crashed specifically, then it's considered crashed out. And the reason I have that split is because the game has a durability stat and a control stat. The control stat is how much control of their car they have. So if they're crashed, I want that stat to be worse. If they blew an engine, I want durability to be worse. So I do have that separated out. That's a little different from our previous files, our previous Excel sheets, but it's pretty straightforward otherwise. Just whatever Racing Reference has, and if you don't have anything, just leave it blank. That's fine too. Stage 1, this is going to be your, if your race has stages, or if you have an extra stat that you want to include and have weighted towards the statistics, you could put them here. Stage 1, Stage 2, average position, same thing. So this is data that we have in modern day with stages and average running position since they've had the scoring loops. The average position they've been running during the race, like each lap, that's also a factor. So these stats obviously will help people run better that ran better, even if they ended with a bad day, with a wreck or something. But that's pretty much it. So that's all you need for the race stats themselves. And however many drivers you have is how many rows you have. If for some reason the race you're doing, say it's Busch Series or trucks or something, I mean, we don't have trucks, but you get my point. There's less vehicles in it. Or even the older races from the 80s or whatever, there were less cars sometimes. But if for some reason you have more cars, that'll also work. Now, the very top here, this is important. So your race name has to be here, and it has to be unique for the program to properly sort things out. And what I mean by that is there's 2 Daytona races in the year. So this one I named Daytona 2. You could call them whatever you want to call them is fine. As long as there's no repeats, you're good. This number right here has to be 0, 1, 2, or 3. And what those equal, if I can type my things here, 0 is short track, 1 is speedway, 2 is super speedway, and 3 is road course. So whatever you want this track to be categorized from real life, from the real results, you use these numbers to represent each track type. I was going to just use the text. The reason I didn't use the text is because there's different ways you could space this or spell this or capitalize, or like there's different ways you could do that. We could abbreviate them, but I thought I'd just use the numbers. As is fine. This cell here is the total number of laps run in the race. Not how many they were supposed to run, but how many they actually ran. The reason that needs to be how many they actually ran is because it has to do with how the laps led boost on their stats is calculated. Now, you could, if you are using Excel, do a sum function to make this easier if you don't have this number readily available just on your laps led column. But if you have the laps led, then you should. And that's it. You just enter all these races, as many as the season has. But they do, even if you don't have this data, you do have to have this many columns per race. Now, as you can see, I did all of the races for 2003 here. Ends at Homestead. And that's it. That's it for the races file. Now, the stats file is even easier. This is just your standings for the season. Now, again, they're in order of how they finished in points. I know there isn't a field that says rank. Same with the racing, the race results. They don't have a rank. It's just their actual finishing position. You're going to want a header column too, by the way, as exactly as this is formatted. Same thing. You could just copy an existing one and write in your new data. The name field, you want this to match exactly. Be careful when copying off Racing Reference. When you copy something and you paste it, you want to paste values or paste matching destination format, because it'll otherwise give you links and other stuff when you're copying from websites. The other factor is Racing Reference likes to give a leading character a lot. So it'll give us Matt Kenseth, but it'll give us like space Matt Kenseth. And there's a way to fix that, and what you do is you just do right. I'm just going to type the formula out so you guys can use it as you see fit. Actually, I think it has 2 leading spaces, if I remember right. You'll have to mess with it and see. Oh, sorry, that's the wrong. So you want this cell at the length of that cell, and I did -2, so drop the M. But if it has 2 leading spaces, then that'll work. And then once you have these for all the names, obviously it's not going to work because I don't have spaces in all of them. But once you have that, you just copy it and then you paste it as values, and it'll overwrite them. So I'm going to undo all that because I'm just showing you guys the formula. You can pause the video back there and get that formula if you're using Excel. So that'll get you the name without spaces at the front. But again, make sure this is formatted the same as you have the names formatted in the race results. This column here is perceived position. So this is something I went over in the regular Excel sheets. This did not change. I have, for example, road course racers I have with a 5 of perceived. If they ran a whole season, where would you rank them? And the reason I did even higher than a road course ringer would perform is because probably only gonna, if I'm making this pack right, I'm probably only including the road course ringers in the road course races. So therefore, how would they do if every race in the season was a road course? They'd probably be in the top 5. So I put them as a 5th place boost. Now the only thing different from the regular Excel sheet is the perception had a percentage weight. In this, it's actually just, it's an overwrite. So this is exactly what it's going to treat them as position-wise, which is fine for the stats. I also like to take a lot of drivers that only run part-time and evaluate them. Nadu got injured. I think I gave him 10th. Honestly, probably would be more like 15th, but you know, it's just I think I gave him 10th because it was weighted before. But we'll give him 15th. Nadu would have been somewhere around there, let's say. Could be 20th, whatever you feel's right. But all the people behind 30th, I usually put at 30th just because if they ran all the races, they probably would be there. You know, now if there's some people that you thought maybe they'd literally run last every time, you could put them, 43rd or whatever. I don't recommend, you can let this go above 43rd, but I don't recommend letting anybody's be above 43rd. And if this is blank down here, then Buckshot Jones will be 57th, actually. I know it says 58, but that's because there's a head of row. So if I leave these blank, he's going to be evaluated as if he was 57th in points, which is going to make his ratings extremely terrible. So instead, I put Buckshot as 20 because he did perform okay when he ran. So I think he'd be a little better than 30th if he ran all the races. All right, so that's just the perception one. Everything else, just your regular stats. This is starts, this is polls. I'm going to actually update these. This is wins, top 5s, top 10s, top 20s, races led most, laps led, and DNF. The races led is how many races they led at least one lap. Races led most is how many races where they led the most laps. That's what that stat is. If you don't have these stats, you can just put them all as zeros. That's totally fine. But it is going to slightly affect the weight and the gap between different drivers if you have the actual numbers here. That's it. That's these stats as is. Again, make sure it's a CSV file. And I'm just going to resave that because I did change the headers. And you guys could run off of this. Actually, we'll do perception, rank, and full name. So then when you guys copy this, it'll be clearer. So those 2 files are necessary before you run the application. You have to create those for whatever your season's going to be. And again, in whatever folder your series is going to be. Now, up again in the data folder, we have paints. And you're going to see I have quite a few different folders here. In the Cup series, let's just go to 2004. And I'm going to show you, actually we'll go 03 because there's more paints for certain drivers. So these folders have to be first name, last name as is in your Excel sheets, in your data. So the folder name has to be the driver name. So I'm going to find somebody who has multiple paint schemes. And so we got Terry Labonte here. So Terry Labonte has multiple paint schemes. And these folders One of them has to be named default. You absolutely must have a default paint. That is their primary, that is their whatever their regular paint scheme is. You have to have a default folder. Cannot stress it enough. You also are going to need this data.csv. Data.csv is very simply the folder name that you made here. So I have one of each. They don't have to be in any particular order. It doesn't matter. I want default to be up top, although I don't think it matters, but put default up top just in case it does. I didn't really check that with my code. Then column B is the sponsor name. Column C, I'm actually not using. I had data there and I'm not anymore. Make sure you leave it blank though. You do still want it here. Column D is the car number. So if somebody runs multiple car numbers in a season, they run different paint schemes, different car numbers, and different car models, you can specify down to that specific paint what car model it is and what car number it is. Now, this is very important here too. This car model, do not type what the car actually is. If you have a Toyota, for example, you cannot put Toyota here. You have to put what car you want the paint scheme to map to in the game. So if you have a Toyota and you painted it on a Chevrolet base and it needs to be on a Chevrolet model, you have to type Chevrolet here. If you have a Toyota on a Pontiac, you have to type Pontiac. So Chevrolet, Pontiac, Ford, Dodge. Those are the four. That's what we have in the game. We also have Pace Car. I didn't fully implement all the features for Pace Car yet, so that may or may not work. No promises. I don't think I did. But that's it. So again, folder name, sponsor name, leave this blank. I mean, you can enter stuff here, but leave a column here, car number, and the car make. And this car number, if you need leading zeros, just make sure you change in Excel or whatever program you're using, you have to change this to text format. Now your options may be somewhere else, but you change it to text, and I can make this the 05, and it would accept it. Now if you don't do that and you type 05, it's just going to change it to 5. So make sure you change that to text to be able to enter a leading zero if you want a leading zero. And that's it. And save that out. I'm just going to close it because I already have the data set up. Now each of these folders have our files, and our files are named exactly as I had them in our previous paint kit setup. So car number menu is what you name your file for all the menus. Pit box is what you name their pit box. Pit sign underscore wall is what you name their wall. The pit sign itself is this part of it, and then this goes on the wall. So I'm opening up another one here. So just for reference, I have my old paint kit here. So there's the basic suit, which is not used yet. I don't have those mapped. Same with the pit crew stuff. I don't have the pit crew stuff mapped. But car numbers, I don't know if the in-car suit's mapped or not. I forget, honestly. I think I did map that, but I'm not 100% sure. But your pit sign for the wall, the driver portrait, the rival ally, the pit box, I think the in-car suit, and the car number are all the things that the program will use for the game. And a car. Now, previously, my paint kit said car 1, car 2, car 3, car 4. We're not doing that. That's what the folders are for. You're just doing car.png. I think if you leave it as car 1 or 2, I did put code in there that should catch it and use it anyway, but I'm not 1000% sure. I think it has to be car. So again, default folder is this. I have this Cheez-It folder which has a different pit box, and I could put a different pit sign for the wall. Doesn't matter. So the way this works, your default folder is where the game will select everything from, except for the car, if you don't have it in this folder. Now if you give alternate things, if you have a portrait of Terry Labonte in the Cheez-It gear, you can put that in here, and it will use it when the Cheez-It car is used. If you have a different pit wall sign, you want to swap that out, or you have a different, maybe they change the number as well, or you want the rival ally icon to update and have the Cheez-It car. If you make those files, they will work. So the program will automatically swap those out. Scott Milk Schemes, just the car. So that's pretty much it. Now, if your driver only has one paint scheme, see, Sterling Marlin only has one paint scheme, you also still have to create this data file. Even though there's just the default folder, you still have to create the data file. It is simply just for the extra data, as the car number and the car make and the sponsor to show in the game. Also, for the record, this will be this is what the text will show up as in the game under the car selection. So if you want it to say Dodge, you have to type it here. The reason I didn't just use the make is because, again, with Toyota or something, some other car make, or if I'm doing older cars like an Oldsmobile, obviously we're not going to, I can't have that there, but I could put this and say Oldsmobile, even if it's on a Dodge body, for example. Okay. That's it for the file setup. I know it's a lot here, but this file setup, once you're set up this way, it's going to be a lot easier to use the program, and I'll show you what I mean here. Alright, so we're onto the program here, and I'm just going to simply make a 2003 pack. So I'm going to go ahead and hit New Core Pack. Now again, everything up here, everything you saw prior to me clicking that button up here, you don't need to change. These are user settings. These will only be changed by the people using the packs, by all the different players. So you don't need to change all this. You don't need to change anything over here. But once you make that you hit New Core Pack, and it'll give you more options down here. So you select your year, and these are driven by the folders in the paints. These are not driven by anything else. So whatever folders you have in all the different paint folders will be what shows up here. So this list is going to get really huge over time. But we're just going to select 2003. Series, you can select multiple if you have multiple series. Same with the years, you can select multiple if you want multiple years. I haven't 100% tested all of that out, so there may be a little bug here or there. You guys will have to bear with me and let me know if there's problems with that. I didn't get time to test it. I want to get this tool in your hands. So I'm going to just select the Cup Series, and it'll load in the season. So these races are the race names that were at the top of our races CSV file. Now I'm just going to make a general pack. So there's core packs and sub packs. So this core pack is essentially just your general pack for what drivers you want to include in this season, in this pack. The sub packs are where you're going to get specific to individual races if you want variants there. So we're going to leave these as season for now. We're not going to touch the track stat adjuster. That's for the user as well. I mean, we can, but if we can for the sub packs. I don't recommend it for the core pack. I don't even think it saves for the core pack, honestly. So that's it for this general tab. So now you go over to roster, and it's going to automatically have selected the year and the series. If you've selected them here, it'll change them here. And what this does is it filters the list of drivers. So 2003, this is Cup. It's filtered down to just the results from the Cup season that year. Now you can add these drivers in one at a time, and by doing that, and you could type if you want to search. So if I was looking for Elliott Sadler, I could type Elliott Sadler. Just start typing and it'll filter down. So I hit load, select the driver, and these will fill out if they have stats and series available, and it'll show their stats. And you hit add driver to active, and it'll add them to this list over here. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit remove selected driver, just because I have a better way. If I have the year filter and the series filter done, I can hit activate all in list, and it will add all of the drivers who have paint schemes. It's going to be specific. If you're missing a paint scheme, it's not going to add them. If they are not in the paint folder, it's not going to add them. So for example, I didn't add the Larry Foyt paint yet. and Larry Foyt's not going to appear on the right. The only thing that's weird is Stanton Barrett is listed in the standings for 2003. At least for my specific case, the only thing that's weird of adding everybody, Stanton Barrett's here. I'm going to remove him because he wasn't in the Cup Series in the car that I have paint data for. So once you have this list done with all your drivers, go ahead and hit Paints and Data. And they'll be a little out of order the first time you do this. But I'm going to go ahead and save this as 2003, and we're going to call it main. You don't have to, I could just call it 2003. That's fine too. I'll just call it 2003 main though. And you click Save Core Pack. That takes an instant, so it's already done. I know I don't have anything visually showing for that, but it's done. So I'm going to go back to General, and it already selected it here. And I'm going to hit Load Core Pack. Continue without saving, yep. And it loads that core pack. So now you see these guys are in different order, and it's by their actual ranking. So if you want them to appear in the right order, you could just save it and reload it, and it'll go in the correct order then. Now, here's where it gets fun. So I've selected Matt Kenseth here, and it sets up his full time. It shows his season rank. You can override that and enter a new one here. I wouldn't sweat that too much because you can override that stuff on another screen. There's also this random stat variance %. I haven't utilized this yet, but if you want their stats to vary up or down by a percentage, then you enter what % you want here. If you want them to just vary a little bit, enter 2, 3, 4, 5%, whatever, something small. And if you want that to apply to all the drivers at once, you can hit Apply to All. So if you just want to apply a flat 5% variance to every single driver, you hit Apply to All, and that'll take care of itself. But what I want to show you, the main things here, are the different paints. So in 2003, there are 2 different paints here for Kenseth. Now, I could, if I wanted to, have him run a paint from a different year. Now, that may get confusing for some packs. You obviously only want to do that if you're making a special pack, but you totally can. So I could say 2007. Now, this will show up a little clearer just because the textures are actually solid. But 2007, maybe I want him to run the Arby's car for some reason. Maybe I made up a fantasy season, and he's running a Ford Fusion from the future. Matt Kenseth came to the past and is racing in 2003 in an Arby's car. Or Arby's hooked up with him early and had a special promotion with Ford. I don't know. Could be... You can make it up, you can change it up, whatever you want to do. But obviously for the regular packs, the core packs, they're going to be just whatever season it is. Now, for the season one, for the core pack, not for the sub pack, but for the core pack, just leave everybody as default paints. Because anybody who uses the core pack, they're going to click this checkbox for randomized paints, and when we get to later steps, it'll automatically randomize between that paint year. It'll pick randomly between the paints available every single race that they run or every time they generate the stats. It's not going to assign multiple paints in the game. And the reason I did this is because only certain cars in the game have multiple paint schemes available by default. So I had to work around this, and a lot of times we're assigning cars to fantasy drivers when we have so many drivers on the roster. So in order to work through that, I have this program assign the random paints. So essentially, if somebody wants random paints, or they want to change stats, or they want to go race to race, they're going to have to rerun the program. And the program, I know it sounds like a pain, but it's actually pretty easy to use for the user. As if you should have seen the other video first. If you haven't, I recommend pausing and go and watch that. It's very quick and easy on how to use this program. All right, with that said, so when you have made changes to this, if you've wanted to for some reason, you can make your changes. If you want a stats to apply from a different season, they don't reload over here. I have to fix that yet, but they should apply on the final screen, which is fine. So I'm going to hit Apply Changes to apply them, or you can hit Cancel Changes if you don't want to apply them. I also want to note, by the way, you can add the same driver multiple times. So if you wanted to do a special pack, just an example, if you're a big Matt Kenseth fan, and you want to do a special pack that has Matt Kenseth from every year of his career, you could do that. You could have Matt Kenseth be every driver. Now I do want to add a feature. It's not in yet, and you could just change your Excel files and it would work. But I want to add a feature to where you can append or suffix their last name so that it says Matt Kenseth 03 or Matt Kenseth 04 or something, so that if you do a pack like that, you could at least decipher who's who when you're on track besides just the paint scheme, because obviously that'd be a pain in the butt to figure out. But you could do that. If you want to do a pack, one pack I want to do someday is, when we have enough paint schemes, is a champion pack, where you take the champion from every season and their stats from that year, their cars from that year, that's what they run. And you could have a championship off between multiple years. You could have Richard Petty with his stats from last time he won a championship versus Dale Earnhardt's last championship versus Jeff Gordon's last championship versus Jimmy Johnson. That could be your pack. Or it can include multiples. Again, same thing. You could have 7 Earnhardts and 7 Pettys and 7 Johnsons and 4 Gordons all on track together, plus every other year in between, and see the champion of champions. So eventually I want to do a pack like that, but obviously we got a lot of paint schemes before we can do something along those lines. Now, once you're happy with what you've done here, make sure you hit apply changes to your last driver if you're in the middle of making changes. But once you're happy with all your changes here, you go ahead and hit finalize pack at the top. When you hit finalize pack, it's going to take a minute to load. Then once it's done loading, and the loading bar will be at the bottom there, you might have saw it already. This screen, if you're doing a pack, you're not likely to change much here. Especially for the core pack, you don't have to change anything here. Now the sub pack, the save options here for this reason. We'll come back to this, but essentially your user can change these stats, how much stuff race ranks get affected by starting position, laps led, whatever. These are all the defaults, the percentages that they apply, and you can recalc them and it'll calculate their stats. But I don't have races applying. This is the full season, so it's just using their season rank. You can sort these lists. I did not set it to sort for the car number yet. I do want to add that. I just haven't figured out how to do that with this particular table view. But anyway, they're sorted by their season rank. And you can see what their stats are over here. And if you want to override these, you can override these. But there's one particular feature I want to cover. It's covered in the other video, but I want to go over it again. The re-rack track stats. So as you can see, if we sort by track stats, the best track ranking is 9 for short track. That puts his rating, his short track rating, based on a 9th position, which can make him a little slower than another season where somebody might have a 3 average. So if you check the re-rack stats, then when they generate the cheat file, then it'll re-rack these and make Earnhardt's short track stat number 1. Gordon, Kenseth, and Johnson are tied, so they'd all be ranked as number 2. And then Harvick will get ranked 5th. Then Burton and Bobby 6th. Then Mike Wallace would be 8th. Then Newman, Kurt Busch, and Labonte would be 9th. And so on. So re-racking re-ranks them, essentially, based on what their ranking is overall. Whereas this is just their average of that whole season, every short track. Junior had an average rank of 9th for all the short tracks. Now, that's it for setting up a core pack. The only other thing we have to do, if you want, and this is not even required, you don't have to do this step. This is just, if you really want to get in depth with it, is to create a sub pack. So sub pack, let's say we want to set up the Daytona 500. So we'll set all these, set it to Daytona 2. These numbers, again, are user settings, so you don't really have to mess with them, but the drop downs will get loaded with your sub pack. So go ahead and set those up. Now, you don't want to change, this is very important, you do not want to change the roster at all. You don't want to change this tab at all if you're just making a sub pack. The core pack is what controls this roster, or what you want to control this roster. So you don't want to mess with this tab at all, because you're essentially adding drivers in, and the way that the program outputs them, it's not going to be pretty that way. I'm not even sure it loads them in anymore. I think only the core pack loads them in. I could be wrong though. But your paints and data tab, you could edit this to your heart's content. So maybe for the Daytona 500, Matt Kenseth ran the $1 million scheme. Now he obviously didn't, but let's just say for whatever reason, the race you're setting up, you know what paint scheme he ran. You could set that paint scheme specifically. I know Jeff Gordon ran this particular paint scheme. I know that Kevin Harvick ran this particular paint scheme. And you could go ahead and set every single driver to whatever paint scheme you want them to be running. And that's more what this pack is for. So not only will their stats be based on that race result, but their paint scheme will be whatever was in that race. Again, this is a little bit of a pain to set up the first time, but once you set this up and you release this to everybody, it's great. So you're not going to have, you're going to have to set it up one time. It's going to be a pain in the butt the first time through. And you're going to have to do it for each race that you want to do it for. Now, I say have to do it. You don't have to do this. This is a bonus feature in my opinion. Also, a lot of people are probably going to run randomized paints. So even setting all these up, if somebody's running randomized paints, then it doesn't matter. But if you want to actually have, exact paint schemes that they ran in exact races, you can set it up that way. Now the other thing that's very important for this, so again, finally, this is going to take a minute to load. So subpack, we'll call this. I'm going to put the number in front just for sorting purposes. Honestly, we're going to go 01 and call it Daytona 500 or just Daytona. So first race of the season, Daytona. That's what I want to save the subpack as. Now you'll see that the S rank here, which is normally the season rank, you'll see that this changed. And this changed because it's factoring in the races. So they all participated in this race. You can see right here, Nadu didn't run Daytona in the fall. So he didn't make the field in that second race. He wasn't in it with his injury, whatever. So he only has the Daytona 500 ranking going in. But you can even use that to decide who's in this pack. So what you can do is you can set every driver who's in the field to full time. And you can see what their rank was. Now again, this isn't their finishing position. This is the combined race rank here. Now if you wanted it to just be their finishing position, I could change all these to 0, recalculate, and it did not totally work. I have to do a -1 on that. Okay, got it. So, noted, will be fixed, don't worry about it. Oh, why did that Ken Schrader's number loaded different? That's weird. I might have to look at that. Anyway, don't worry about those. I'm going to look at those things and see what happened there. But, regardless, you can see who was in this race. So, I'm going to make buttons to do this a lot quicker, but I'm not super concerned on it at the moment. But what you can do is you could set everybody who's in this race to full time. And if you want the couple of people that finished in the back, or if you want certain drivers to, you can make them questionable. Yeah, the numbers got desynced with the names there. That's weird. But if you want certain drivers to be enabled or disabled, you can do that right here. So again, if I want the race rank, everybody who wasn't in the field, I could set them as disabled. I could set them as fantasy. I'd recommend setting them as fantasy. That way they still show up in the driver select screen. But everybody who wasn't in it, I want them to be fantasy. And if you want a couple of drivers, because the player is going to take the 43rd slot, so there's only 42 cars in. If you leave everybody as full time, the game's going to determine it. And I'm not sure how it determines that. I haven't figured that out fully yet. So you'll want to set those to, set a few people that were in the back, whether they qualified there, or finish there, you could set a few people to part-time, and then that will make them vie for that last position. That way you won't lose somebody like Newman or Earnhardt to whatever the game determines. Again, I don't know what stat that drives off of. But once you set all that up, then you go ahead and hit Save Subpack. And that'll save out as a separate file specifically for that race. The players can load the core pack and then select this subpack on the main screen and load the subpack, and it'll load these full-time, part-time, and race stat settings that you have specifically set up. So the nice thing about this program is once you have all the drivers in, if you forget who ran each race, you don't have to worry about it too much because it's going to be in those results. So the only thing you'd have to remember is which car they drove. If for example, like Andretti driving a bunch of cars, figuring out which car he drove specifically in the Daytona 500, you'd have to go look that up. So you can set up a little more quickly and easily without having to do, go back to the research. You can see who ran the race. Another thing you can do if somebody didn't run a race and you want them to have other race stats apply. So specifically we have Daytona and Daytona 2 set up, but for someone like Nadu or Andretti who didn't run the July race, you could type Talladega in the race 2 stats and get their Talladega stats from that race if they participated in that one. That way you'll still have more than one race result to calculate their stats off of to give them a little more variance. But it won't override for everybody. You just could set Talladega for those specific people or whatever track you want it to be. Also, if you don't like the rank that the program is giving for that driver in the race, they had a bad race. So Newman in the Daytona 500, for example, wrecked out. You can override their rank for that race just the same way that you could override their season rank or their final rank that gets output by the program. So if you want, you can override those. So I'm going to go through these steps again real quick for another track just to kind of summarize them a little more quickly. So you'll go back to your general tab. You'll change your race stats 1 and 2 to Rockingham, let's say, and the track stat to Rockingham. Then you'll go to your paints and data tab and change any driver's paints to be what they need to be for that particular race. Then you go ahead and hit finalize. And you can change race rankings if you need to. Otherwise, you type in the new subpack name, so O2-Rockingham is what I'm going to put. And then you click Save Subpack. And that's all. Those are the only steps necessary to update a pack, to add a subpack specific to each track, each race. If you want to add a driver to an existing pack, so let's say you added a new paint or a driver that was a back marker, then I recommend this method that I'm about to say. But if you're wanting to do something like, say, add some extra fantasy drivers or extra core drivers to a pack, you might want to just start over with a new pack. So I'm going to do an example of adding Talladega Nights drivers to the 07 pack. However, I would recommend just making a new one that includes them. The difference being, if you add a driver to an existing pack, it won't affect the order that they're mapped in the game as long as you don't remove anybody. If you make a new pack from scratch, then the drivers will get mapped differently. So you can't quite map them up perfectly every time to be able to swap between packs, which is the whole point of the core pack versus sub pack. Once you have a core pack, you aren't going to want to change that without it being a sub pack that's changing it. The only time you want to change a core pack is if you're adding a driver to the existing roster and not removing anyone. So I'm just, for simplicity's sake, I am going to add some Talladega Nights drivers to this pack. So we're going to add all of them. And they're going to be, kind of out of order here, which is fine. But when I hit finalize, they're going to probably be, they actually are getting ordered by their rank to some extent. Okay. Technically, these guys will be added to the back end of the pack. And what I mean by that is how they get mapped. So in the game, Jimmy Johnson was already mapped to somebody. This won't affect where Johnson was mapped. So if somebody adding them in the way I just added them in will work for an existing pack for a change. But the problem is the further down the roster we get, the less likely it is that they'll have a portrait in the game, the less likely it is that they'll have other items in the game. So you're going to want, for drivers like this, you're going to want them to be more likely to get portraits and whatnot, which is why I said about making a whole new core pack for those, you know, if you want to do a special Talladega Nights setup or something along those lines. However, in this case, we're just adding them into the existing pack. If they don't get the image priority, that's fine. If they don't end up with portraits and other, you know, rival ally images, that's fine. The reason I bring that up is the limit of cars in the pack is 84. The limit of portraits in the pack is 47 currently, and the limit of ally and rival images is actually 40. So the full field will not have ally rival images, and what I mean by that is not necessarily this that pops up on screen. This is a portrait. But I mean on the results screen where it shows drivers that have changed in rating. So if you want someone like Jean Girard, Cal Knott, and Ricky Bob, you want them to be, you know, top drivers. They're going to be on the track a lot. You're going to have interactions with them as a player. You're going to want them in the pack early enough that they get a slot. Essentially the way it works is when you add them to the roster, when you the very, very, very first time you click finalize pack is when it maps them to the drivers in the game, which is when the ally rival check happens. But once you save that pack, that's locked. So adding a driver after the fact, they're not going to have that ally rival slot. They're going to be in one of the later slots in the game. Same with pit stalls. The pit stalls themselves, there's a limited number of cars that have pit stalls that are unique. I don't remember what that number is offhand, but that is also another factor in this, initial adding versus adding after the fact. But that said, all of this that I added after the fact, these guys will work now. I gave them stats. I made up some stats and gave them stats in an Excel CSV file for that stat year, and it all loads in correctly, and they're put amongst the active roster. I could save this out as Talladega Nights. Now, actually, technically, I could overwrite the existing Cup one, but because I'm adding on to it. So if I was just updating the Cup roster and adding a driver that's somewhere in the back, I'd just overwrite it because I don't mind if they don't have the pictures showing up in all of the circumstances. But if I'm making a brand new pack, then I wouldn't recommend these steps. I'd recommend going back, hitting new core pack, and building, add your Talladega Nights guys in first, add your Cup guys in next, and so on. Actually, the order doesn't matter here as long as add everybody in and then go to finalize pack, and you should be good. So lastly, the only thing you're going to need when sharing your pack out is your stats files, if you have any. You have to let people know what the path is, so you may just want to zip this folder or include this folder in with your pack. The paints that you've included, so in my case the Talladega Nights paints, in this example anyway, the fantasy ones, and any of the packs files that you've created. Now I didn't actually keep that 2007 Talladega Nights one, but whatever folder is created here for your core pack, and then subfolders are created for sub packs. So essentially you just would need to grab this outer folder. So again, the packs folder, the paints that you've added, and the stats folder. If you have all those three things, you put those together in a pack, and then as long as somebody copies them to the correct locations. So they put the stats in the correct series folder, they put the packs in the correct folder here, and they put the paints where they go, then they'll be able to use that core pack with the tool. So that's going to do it, guys, for this video. Hopefully this covered everything that we need to worry about here. I know there's a lot to this. I know there's a lot more to come, and there's a lot more to do. But this should give pack makers and painters a better idea of how that works and how you can add your own individual cars in. Again, the big thing is that they have stats to go off of. Also be wary of adding spaces in your folder names versus your file names. It has to match up in that regard. So if you do add fantasy stats and you make up your own thing to add your own custom driver in, just make sure that they don't have to have the individual races. These are just this is just another season, but you do want to have a file with races with at least one race in it, just for the selection's sake. Otherwise they won't load in properly. So you have to have both, but you only have to really fill out this particular stats one as I did here and just threw some numbers in. But that's it. If you guys have other questions, if you guys have other problems or other requests, other ideas, so on and so forth, just please go to the Discord and let me know. There's, I'm open to a lot of suggestions yet. We're still working on other things. I'm working on getting tracks properly swapped and all that extra stuff with the schedule changing. So that's going to do it for this video. Please check us out on the Discord. Check us out on the Patreon if you haven't already. Any support is super helpful and will, definitely give me some incentive to work harder on this and keep the pace up on what I've been working on. It's a lot of work. Hopefully you guys understand that, and we'll get more paints going. We'll get more series going, and I think the workload on the tool is kind of slowing down here a bit as we get the last couple pieces of the puzzle done. All right, thanks all for tuning in, and see ya on the next video, which will hopefully just be a pack or a schedule update.